My name is Mariëlle Heijltjes from Maastricht University School of Business and Economics in the Netherlands. And I'm here today at USB Leaders Angle to talk about courage in complexity and inquire into the leadership challenges that complexity brings. And what I'll try to do this morning in the hour is basically work with two themes. One is defining the context of leadership. And then the second issue is, of course, if you know that and if you have lenses and sort of tools to work with that, what does that mean for organizations and for leaders? How I started defining the context of leadership was simply looking at what did I see when I worked with the different executive groups of different places in the world. And pictures emerged then like this. I was in South Africa last year with the World Bank, and again, it's my lens. What I perceived in the context was here the issue of the importance of diversity and inclusion. And interesting to me in that context was that it was discussed in a way that I could intellectually follow, but never really understand. I was fortunate enough to go in that same year to go to MIT. And there you have the MIT Media Lab. So the importance of progress in relation to interdisciplinary science, I think, is paramount in the developments. In January, and you might have seen it, the World Economic Forum in Davos is always held. And there, I think, another issue emerged, which Carl Schwab of the World Economic Forum calls the fourth digital revolution. In just the ranking of all the things that I talked about that were in the movie, you get a list of context elements from digitalization and software, globalization, importance of sustainability, changing employee, client, patient expectations depending on where you are, aging population, migration, rethinking economic systems. I think when you look at this list, it's very easy, if you're not a complete optimist, to think, ooh, where do I start? First of all, and second of all, the reaction that I often see is that people, because it's so big, is that people say, well, what does that have to do with me? I'd be very curious if you look at these lists, like from your context now, which ones would be most important to you? How would they affect you? The reason why I find this useful because it's very a pragmatic lens. And what it helps you do, this is based on, it's not the literal like picture of the Cynefin model, but what essentially it helps you sort through the type of challenges that you face. And it boils down to two ways of looking. On the one hand, you look at, and that's the plurality in perspectives, you look at how many different points of view are there in this particular issue that I'm dealing with in the context. And in this particular issue, if there's only a relatively limited number of different points of views, or are there many? And if there are many that can all be right. That's what I mean. The other dimension is transparency. To what extent can you see how cause and effect is related? So how easy is it to see if I do A, that B will result? And if you think about issues in that way, you have the simple, the obvious issues. There's not many different points of view. And it's fairly easy to see that if you do A, B results. So it's the type of issues that you can make rules for, because you can actually specify the different steps. It's a type of issues that you can make benchmarks for, because you can compare actually A to B. Complicated are those where you can, after some time, find how A is related to B. So cause and effect can be established, but there's multiple points of view how. So you need experts. So it's the type of challenges where you say, okay, I need experts to make sense of it, but in the end, I can find the solution. In the chaotic, you cannot make sense of everything. It's just all blurred. There's no pattern that you can see. It's a bit messy. And then you have the complex wicked, which in my mind is the most interesting category, because that's the type where you say, okay, I cannot see cause and effect. So when I look back, I can see a pattern. So when I look back, I can say, this is what we did. This is fairly interesting. And you always have multiple points of view, who can all be right. So this is a very interesting category. You cannot predict, but you can look back and see the pattern in retrospect. So what in fact happens then? So if that is indeed the case, that benchmarks and rules is very important, that the organization is based on these principles, and in fact most of reality is going to be complex, what happens then? So what in most organizations and also countries in that way, are we collectively creating an illusion of control? Because what in fact you're doing is, if you think, well, this is what the world looks like, but because, ooh, that's way too messy and way too hard, let's just pretend it's complicated or simple and obvious. You create an illusion of control. And what you see, it's ingrained in how we organize the world, is on the one hand, you have the classic hierarchy that almost every organization, unless you're a relatively small startup or chose to be radically different, most organizations have features of the classic hierarchy, which is very well organized to deal with simple, obvious, or complicated problems, because it's efficient. You know, you look at a dominant group that you create a value to, usually it's up the hierarchy. You say, okay, I have an outcome that I can clearly define, and I can work towards that outcome, and thus make plans towards that outcome. But there's a big assumption that the world is predictable and stable underlying it. Then you get to a situation that if there are differences, and if people do respond to the changing environment, that is frowned upon, or often people are called, like my example that I just gave, they say, okay, what is happening here? Why is there a break with the system in that sense? So it's execution of rules that counts, because you have the rules to govern the behavior. Leadership is very much focused on compliance, and it's a very leader-centered way of organizing. So the leader in the organization is assumed to know best. The complex, wicked problems really demand a different way of organizing, and you already used the word creativity, because then, in addition, there you have the more, what they now call agile ways of organizing. So in an agile form of organizing, you have the assumption that, you know, maybe I cannot know the outcome in advance. And if I cannot know the outcome in advance, that means that you have to design a system that is adaptable to begin with. It requires something different of the people, because it requires that they move from compliance to commitment, so that everybody in the organization feels responsible and committed to doing for what is best for the collective and not just for themselves. And the leader role shifts dramatically, because you're not at the top of the hierarchy anymore, but you're part of a complex system. You're part of the whole. So that means I'm still the leader in terms of that I am responsible for certain things, and I have to be accountable to another group. However, I know where my role is and what I can do, and I know what the other persons can also contribute. So it's a very specific definition of who contributes what. And if you put that in a graph, on this side is the classic hierarchy. Like you have the authoritarian manager or leader, and if you have an authoritarian manager or leader, well, I don't have to tell you that, you can only have obedient subordinates, and if you don't have them, you end up in a fight. There's no other option. If you move to more complexity, then at a certain point, the leader or the manager will not be able to understand anymore what is going on, so he needs others to participate. That changes the role of the people that follow. They have to get more active, they have to really engage, but it's still, in that paradigm, it's the participative manager or the participative leader who is in control. Then when you shift to the other side, then you switch it a little bit around and you say, okay, now let's assume that I can not know that anymore, and I really need to empower others. So really I give chunks of what I'm doing to other people, because they simply are out in the field and know best, they have the best information or the best competences to deal with it. And then on the other hand, you completely switch it around. There you see the leader as being at the service of all the others. What I do see, however, is because of the necessity of combining the classic hierarchy with more agile forms of organizations, is that leaders need to know how to shift. So in terms of the leader behaviors, back and forth, this side's often called administrative leadership in the literature. It's behaviors that you will all know, and will never go away. I don't think there could be an organization where this behavior is not exercised. So it's the sticking to the rules, having a certain predictability to people, making sure people execute what is being decided upon. Somebody has to take the decisions in the end, I mean, otherwise you cannot move forward. And providing direction. So it's not, again, just free flow, everything goes, towards the more adaptive leadership behaviors. And these are all at an individual level. Now, what it also requires is a different way of interacting within the organization. It's taken from a study where we just sat in boardrooms for long periods of time and observed what people did, how top management and middle managers interacted. Just simply what they said, what they non-verbally did, what they didn't do, what they wrote down, which decisions that they take. And there you see that if you have them interacting, there's two processes that are important to look for, that you can actually actively manage if you're in a leadership role, whether you're managing upwards or whether you're moving downwards, to use the classic hierarchy terms. And that's information exchange. That's the one thing that happens when you meet other people. And it's mutual influencing. That's the other thing that happens when you meet people. And in information exchange, it appeared that the process of being cognitively flexible, so your ability to well, you can call it empathy, but in a more cognitive sense, cognitively seek and understand the other perspective. When people would be able to do that well, it would contribute significantly to more effective functioning of the team. A mutual influence in this was more an attitude. The attitude of win-win. Integrative bargaining, win-win. So sitting there, not with the intention to drive your point through, but sitting there knowing about the collective goal and thinking, okay, if this is the collective, wait, this is how we can engage in it. And that's a mindset as well as a skill. It starts with the mindset. Looking at information exchange and to be cognitively flexible, what then does that require of you? Because cognitive flexibility, on the one hand, requires for you knowing what you stand for. And the second element, it almost speaks for itself, is of course an open mind. So it's cognitive flexibility in that sense it can be trained, an open mind. So. And perspective taking, of course, making deliberate efforts. You can try it in the next meeting that you go to, deliberate efforts to say, if you don't agree with somebody, okay, what would I see? What would the world look like if I sit on this other person's seat? Then you have mutual influencing. Win-win mindset, you have to know what drives you. So not what you stand for, that's different, but what drives you. Empathetic listening is another one. And that's different from perspective taking. Perspective taking is an intellectual thing. Empathetic listening involves feeling. It involves the heart. It involves really imagining to be the other. And then summarizing. What would that require for you in a leader role? It should come as no surprise anymore what I'm going to tell now. As it's, on the one hand, it's being aware of this whole system. So looking broader, looking wider, not just focusing on this one problem, or seeing where does it fit? What type of issue is it that I'm dealing with? Like, is it indeed complex? Is it simple? How am I dealing with it in the bigger, am I creating this illusion of control? Or am I just treating it as such because I don't know how to do it otherwise in the time that I have? If things are complex, if you try to reconcile classic hierarchy with agility, inherent paradoxes will be there. So how will you deal with these? To do that is not easy. It requires courage at a personal level. And you can develop that by yourself by taking first steps, as you would do in complex problems. And that is, on the one hand, train yourself in perspective taking and empathetic listening. Think about what you stand for. Know what you stand for. Very simple exercises that just keep writing down those things when you think, wait a minute, now I got really upset when somebody said something to me. Just write it down. And then in retrospect, look back and see, is there a pattern? And what are the things that I really care about? And this is a very important one. Is if you want to shift between the classical and the hierarchy and reconcile them, is if you're in a leader role, even more so than in a follower role, understand what the impact of your actions is. Now, there's one question left. The only one. Are you courageous enough? Thank you very much.